Hey, it's 2.2, step 3, literary aspect jigsaw, and this video is about the motif of eyes. So take some notes, if you would, in your packet. First of all, how is this pattern, this literary aspect defined? Let's talk about what a motif is. First of all, a motif is a symbolic image or idea that repeats. All right. Motif originally comes from the French, meaning pattern. So it's something that works as a pattern throughout the book. So when you see something repeating, you'll know it's a motif, and it probably has some kind of figurative or metaphoric significance, right? So when we're looking at the reference to eyes, it becomes a motif because it's used over and over again. But when you're looking for an individual example of the motif, you are going to simply watch for descriptions of people's eyes, eye contact, objects that look like eyes and that are compared to eyes work as well. References to the spies of Gilead, because their name is also eyes. And so those are all some different things that you can look for and that work as examples of the motif of eyes. That's how we're going to define this literary aspect for the book. All right, so let's take a look at some samples. The first one is in chapter 2. In the center of it, a blank space plastered over like the place in a face where the eye has been taken out. So that's on page 7. It's describing Offred's bedroom ceiling, right? And she'll mention this. She comes back to this at the very end of the first reading as well. She's looking up at this place in that night chapter, chapter 7. And it looks like an eye, or it looks like an eye has been removed, and it's like the wounded scar, left. How about this one in chapter 2? There remains a mirror on the hall wall. If I turn my head so that the white wings framing my face direct my vision towards it, I can see it as I go down the stairs, round, convex, a pier glass, like the eye of a fish, and myself in it like a distorted shadow, a parody of something, some fairy tale figure in a red cloak, descending towards a moment of carelessness that is the same as danger, a sister dipped in blood. So she's talking about seeing her reflection in a mirror and compares the mirror to the eye of a fish here. How about in chapter 4? Nick winks at Offred after he looks at her and sees her looking, and she thinks perhaps he is an eye. So we've got the wink. There's a reference to an eye. And then also the fact that he might be a spy, also called an eye. Chapter 4, we have this moment in Returning My Past. The one with the peach-colored mustache bends his head to try to get a look at my face. I raise my head a little to help him, and he sees my eyes, and I see his, and he blushes. His face is long and mournful like a sheep's, but with the large full eyes of dog, spaniel, not terrier. His skin is pale and looks unwholesomely tender like the skin under a scab. Nevertheless, I think of placing my hand on it, this exposed face. He is the one who turns away. Such moments are possibilities, tiny peepholes. So this is the eye contact between Offred and the guard. And so that's a good example of the motif of eyes. Here's another one in chapter 4. Or sometimes a black painted van with a winged eye in white on the outside. The windows of the vans are dark tinted, and the men in the front seats wear dark glasses of double obscurity. So the winged eye is actually the logo of Gilead. So it's an eye with wings on either side. Here's another one from chapter 4. What they must see is the white wings only, a scrap of my face, my chin, and part of my mouth, not the eyes. I know better than to look the interpreter in the face. Most of the interpreters are eyes, or so it's said. So we have a couple of references to eyes here. This is the fact that she's not supposed to look people directly in the eyes, not to make eye contact, right? Including the interpreter. And she really shouldn't break the rules with him because he may very well be a spy, an eye. Okay, so those are all some good examples from the very first reading. And, you don't need to be writing every single one of these down. I should have said that earlier, shouldn't I? I'm sorry. But you know what? You could mark them in your book if you wanted to. You could draw a little eye next to each one. That would be perfectly okay. And then in your packet, You're going to pick two good examples from the first 103 pages or 106 pages of the book to write about. So you could pick two of these if you wanted, or if you wanted to pick some from after chapter 7 for the second reading, that would be perfectly okay too. All right, what are some effects of this literary aspect? So what does it do to the reader? And you can think of this partly in terms of what it does to Offred too, because as the narrator, we're feeling a lot of what she is feeling. And so you can kind of start there and then think, okay, then what is the effect on me, the reader? What kind of thoughts do I have? What kind of feelings do I have in response to these uses? So one suggestion, and you can use these when you write about this motif, because they're there, all right? As long as you can see them and it makes sense to you, feel free to use these, but you could use something else as well. Creates a feeling of constant surveillance. Well, that is Gilead, isn't it? The totalitarian regime that controls every aspect of humans' lives and has taken away all of their rights. It also reinforces the feeling of separation between individuals. And, you know, when Offred is not meant to make eye contact, you know, that is a kind of limitation that creates a separation, a lack of intimacy between humans. And of course, Gilead is doing that, making that rule on purpose. It parallels the idea of knowing and understanding too, isn't it? When we look into someone's eyes, that's when we really know them, right? And so an eye is often used as a figurative symbol for knowledge and understanding, or at least knowledge and understanding of where someone else is coming from, right? Someone else's point of view. And so when eyes are used in the book, watch for the connection there and how there's a lack of knowledge and understanding when people can't see, and maybe there's a little more knowledge and understanding when people can see, something like that. It also creates a feeling of objectification through the male gaze. Are you familiar with this term? It was coined by Laura Mulvey in 1975, and it comes from feminist theory. And she was originally writing about cinema. And the idea of the male gaze, after Mulvey named it, has become a really important topic in feminist theory. So the idea is that in a lot of narratives, the story is told through a male perspective, and that oftentimes the male that looks at a female as an object. And so the female is reduced from a human with complex thoughts and ideas with multiple dimensions, and it becomes really just kind of a vehicle to further the male with whatever he's doing as a character in this movie or story. And so it's also, the theory also offers up kind of a resistance to that too, and a way that women can subvert the male gaze and challenge it. And so I think that Atwood is doing that a lot in this book, where she, you know, instead of having the male, you know, looking at the female as an object and thinking of, you know, thinking about sort of what they can get out of that individual, whatever it might be. Offred does that in the first reading, doesn't she, with the guard? And so it really turns this idea on its head. So I've got that mentioned here. At other times, the male gaze is subverted by Offred. What else did I want to say about that? I guess just that the viewer, the one who is doing the viewing, has more power than the one that is viewed, right? If we're hearing from their story, we're seeing how they see the individual. And so even if they're not turned into an object per se, their humanity or individuality may be limited. Okay, connections to the theme then are the next piece. Well, first of all, the power of voice to create truths. And I think that comes up pretty obviously in what I just said about the male gaze, right? If the person who is doing the viewing and is writing about, from their point of view, what they're seeing, then they're creating a truth about what they see, about what they perceive. And so whoever is telling the story, and remember in this case it is Offred, has more power and can change the truth. So watch for that as you read. Resisting oppression like a girl is our second theme. So the idea that Offred is resisting being oppressed by the totalitarian government of Gilead, but that she's doing it in a sort of subtle way, stereotypically feminine kind of way, so that she can last, so that she's not going to be found out, because she wants to survive. Innocence, guilt, and redemption. Offred feels a little bit guilty for looking at the guard the way that she does, knowing that she's affecting him in a negative way, but she still does it, right? And so she realizes, I think, at that moment that the way that the power structure has been set up, it requires, in order to feel like you have some freedom, some agency, it requires you to put someone else in an uncomfortable situation. And so those power dynamics create guilt in someone who is taking power. But then look at how this comes up in other places. We see some of Offred's guilt with her daughter and what has happened to her daughter. Does that connect at all to this literary aspect? And how about innocence, redemption? Does anybody find redemption? Is anyone forgiven for wrongs? And who's truly innocent? Maybe Offred's daughter? The story and imagination as creative forces is our last theme. And this one is, I think, pretty clear when we think about how telling a story from one's point of view through our own eyes is an act of agency. If we tell our own story, it's a creative force to share with someone else. If we've only heard the story from some other point of view and now suddenly we're hearing it from this new point of view, it is a creative force that can challenge maybe some of the untruths that have been created in the past. All right, so hopefully this was helpful for you to understand this literary aspect, and now you're going to look for it as you continue reading. There is a space in 2.2 step 3 for you to find examples, and I think your job is to find 2 examples for these first 2 readings, so pages 3 to 106. And you can use 2 of my examples if you want to, or you can find others. Mine are all from the first 7 chapters, so it stops at page 43, I believe. 40, page 40. All right, thanks. Good luck to you as you work on this literary aspect and read the book.